just to look at what XBIM is about, and I suspect some of you have heard of us, but I'll introduce what we do and what our products are in a minute. But broadly speaking, we're trying to democratize the use of building information all the way through the life cycle, from initial conception, inception, design, all the way through construction, operation, and afterwards. And we try to do that with open standards. What really drives us is the use of interoperable data, data that can be exchanged between different software and different organizations and parties with a kind of a minimum hassle. We're about 10 strong as an organization right now, notionally based in the northeast of England, although we're actually all over. The three founders have got our roots in the northeast. I'm chief exec. We're all three software engineers, but my background's in a company called Viewpoint for Projects. Steve is a professor of architecture, but is also a software specialist. Helped found what you know as MBS Create and the BIM Academy a few years ago, and is the original author of the XBIM Toolkit, which I'll just allude to in a minute. Martin is our CTO, is a specialist in GIS systems and BIM and 3D and geometry. So if you've heard of XBIM, quite a lot of you will have heard of it about the Toolkit, which is a very well used software library or set of software libraries, freely available on GitHub under a license that can be used for commercial use cases, but is also used ad hoc in academia and so on. Came out of some research that Steve did and some work we did together when I was at Viewpoint for Projects. Just to give you an idea, it's used by thousands of software developers around the world. It's a little bit of a we never quite know who uses it because it's open, because you can download it for free. But in the kind of indicative surveying we've done, this gives you an idea of where people are downloading it. And these are typically software developers, hundreds of thousands of downloads. And when we have got in touch with some of the software developers who use this, it's really been used in a lot of mission critical environments, and it's pretty battle hardened as a result. It's kind of it's a really stable piece of software to work with BIM data. Just to give you an idea, kind of some of the folks who use it, both as Toolkit, and I'll come to our Flex proposition. This is a mixture of both, but it's used by the very large organizations, from the Bentleys and the Viewpoints and the MBSs, to sort of smaller organizations, software startups like BIMtrack, After Premise, and so on. I think I've seen Brian on the line. So yeah, it's used by a lot of organizations behind the scenes, essentially white labeled into their software products to essentially give them a fast track to BIM. And really what we try and help people do is, first of all, is work with OpenBIM files. And particularly when we're talking around Flex, XBIM Flex is about taking data that's in OpenBIM files and turning it into essentially a graph database. And that gives you, rather than dealing with files and models and projects, gives you a really wide view over your whole portfolio of many projects, many buildings, and many facilities that you're managing as either an asset owner or a contractor or any other discipline. It's a really powerful mechanism, and obviously it's completely customized and access controlled and so on. But yeah, that's a kind of a USP of what we're doing with Flex, is we're taking BIM files and turning it into data. When we, just so you understand who our customers are, as you've seen already, most of them are software vendors, software developers, or technical audiences within a BIM consultancy. We're all really about how can you accelerate time to market, how can you get BIM into your product really quickly and launch a solution and get to revenue really quickly. That's why we're used by lots of startups, but it's also why we're used by folks who may also want to go and move from existing products that have got BIM in, maybe they're desktop-based, Windows-based on-premise, into a cloud-based solution. And that's particularly where Flex comes in, because Flex is our platform is cloud-ready. It's already hosted in Microsoft Azure. One of the USPs there is you can essentially host it in any Azure region you want. So when it comes to governance and data sovereignty, you're in control. If you want to be in a South African data center, your client does, you can host it in a South African data center, just by way of an example. Last thing we do, one of the major groups of things we do is process automation, and I'll show a quick example of this. particularly around, how do you automatically manage, quality assure, and actually extract new value from BIM data. And one particular use case we've got is essentially calculating carbon impact for designs is automatically without a human in the loop. And I guess we'll show you that quickly. So if you look at end to end, we cover the whole gamut really of say from inception, conceptual design, all the way through to operation. But broadly speaking, what our technology lets you do is take designs that have come from the authoring world. So case in point, something like Revit. And while Revit can, there's a great tool, it's obviously locked to a desktop, and it's actually quite hard for an end user to use. And really what you want is interoperability. How can you get the data out? And we essentially help and automate how you'll get OpenBIM IFC data out of a tool like Revit or other authoring tools. We can improve upon the output that they perhaps do by default, streamline that, and I'll show you a quick example of that. But where Toolkit and where XBIM is typically used is by software developers who are wanting to work with OpenBIM files, so IFC, BCF, Kobe, the building smart standards essentially. An XBIM Toolkit is a software library. I say it's open source. You can go to GitHub and download it, and you can use it in your commercial software. Its main audience is very much technical software developers, and I would say if you want to build a cloud application, there's a lot of work to do, and that's the case with any toolkit like that. It works with the files, and what it does, it turns files into data, and files into geometry, things you can visualize. It does it really well, and it also lets you read and write data. So you can amend building models with that toolkit. You can also translate between different formats. And fundamentally, it turns these quite opaque and awkward to work with data files into something you can work with for a particular use case. So why do you need Flex? Flex I've already alluded to. Flex is our cloud platform. What we've done is take the toolkit and essentially host it in the cloud and lift it up a level. And really what that does is take away all those concerns I've mentioned around trying to build a cloud application is an order of magnitude more difficult than building a little Hello World Windows application. And it's to make it trivial. What Flex does is makes it really simple so that you can build and integrate and perhaps add BIM to your existing cloud application. Its key points are with Flex is it's cloud-based, multi-user, multi-tenants, and it's a really scalable platform that you can be up and running in minutes, and you can have a product ready in. We've turned a product around in about 3 or 4 weeks for a client who needed to show something really, really quickly, and they're able to do that because they're building on our cloud platform. So that's gives you really broadly what we do. Take data all the way through the life cycle. And it's important when it's in Flex is that it becomes like a master record. It manages that transition from this is a set of design data into this is an operational data, and it can then be used for operational use cases. So I'm going to give you a few examples now of how we've used Flex and how some of our partners have used Flex. There's obviously I can't clearly many software products I can show that belong to our third parties because it's their IP, but I'll show you a couple of insights into how it can be used. So the first one is this use case of how do you get data out of a tool like Revit. That's it is a capability of Revit. You can file export IFC. It's tremendously complex. There's about 300 switches to do that, and every one of them seems to be set incorrectly. So it's very easy to go wrong, and what you end up with is a big file, and you perhaps lose a lot of context. So this is a product actually we built right at the beginning 2020, just before lockdown. In about 2 months, we built this product called Flex Comms. We actually built it for ourselves as a software product we can offer to architects. And the use case is how can I quickly get data out of my authoring tool so I can share it with a non-specialist without the need for Revit and the like. But also how can I bring over drawings? How can I bring over data that's associated with that model? And actually, let's stop sending PDFs around. So I'm going to quickly show you how we do this, and I'm probably going to show you, because I haven't got Revit installed on this laptop, just a 30 seconds bit of video just so you can understand what it does. So in Revit we've got a plugin And this plugin in here is essentially you can define a message template, and what you've got is an ability to link it through to things like the drawings, the sheets, the schedules, all the ancillary data that's in that model, and select just the information you want. So in this case, we've got a BIM technical school, and I selected a default view, some floor plans, there's probably some sections in there, and I picked a couple of schedules. And then what you're seeing here is the building model is being shipped off to Flex. In the background, we're turning it into something you can visualize. This is essentially a placeholder image. What you'll see now is, as it loads in, there'll be a 3D model that transitions to exactly this, kind of the interactive 3D model. And the use case here is around how do you have a light touch communication with, you know, a supplier, a subcontractor, or someone without access to Revit. We might see it's neat in here is we can these save views that I've picked are interactive, so I can take a view from a 3D view from a design model, and it automatically will orientate the 3D model to recreate that view. What I'm doing here is taking highlighting, I guess, some entry doors on this school, adding that to my message, and then I'm going to go and send it off to some other person, and they will receive an email that essentially will give them links straight back into this product. So they get an email like this, contains just the contents of that building message, and when they open that in Flex, sign in, and they can get the same view that you, as the originator of that data, that's sent to them. They've clicked on that 3D view there, which is reoriented the model, and then here they're going to click on some floor plans, and the floor plans will be generated essentially on the fly based on the drawing plan. You'll also see, I think we can bring open the drawing itself, so we can take the full-scale drawing, print it, and so on. And lastly, what we're bringing out here, I think, is some data. So I think rather than bringing out all the data, one of the schedules we added was a door schedule, so we could see, you know, if we were dealing with a door contractor, just the data to do with the doors. In this case, you know, bottom kits and different type data, so on relating to those doors. So this is a tool we built in 2 or 3 weeks, probably in 6 weeks, I think, probably a couple of years ago, end to end with our software toolkit. Full collaboration, it's multi-user, you notice it's real time, and it's got, you know, BIM data, structural data, drawings and documents all mashed together in one application. I mean, I'll just to give you an idea what that looks like in reality, you can go to our website actually, and you can see this and try it out for real. This is real time now. So different model. Again, this is actually a test model of a building in Toronto. You see, actually, it's placed on a map. We've also linked it through to other bits of data, you know, a link on Google Maps, or maybe it's a PDF of some specification data. And you'll see perhaps in use here. So I can take that floor plan, 5th floor plan, click on that, and it will cut the building into floor 5, as if it were a drawing. Equally, we can do things like, okay, we're interested in this room. This has got a bunch of IoT sensors in it, and you know, perhaps we want to just narrow down on this part of the building so that we can, you know, undertake some analysis of our IoT data. I'm just going to reset the view again. I'll show you that interactive aspect with data. So I've got all kinds of sensors in this building, and so we're going to load them in now. And this is obviously data you can search, filter, you can export it to Excel. But it's really useful when it's tied together with the building model itself. So these are a bunch of sensors or cubicles. So we've got a temperature sensor. I can select it. It will flash at some point. I can click on it and actually take us through to that sensor in the 3D model, and we can see exactly where it is in that building. So that's kind of just gives you an idea of this. This application is a SaaS application, you know, we make available. But really, it's more of a demonstrator of what you can pull together quite quickly with our platform, and certainly how you can get data out of the proprietary world. So I'll take some questions in a bit, but I'll show you an additional use case. I'll just talk through this one. All that data that I showed you there, you know, door schedules or sensor schedules or whatever else. What's interesting in Flex is if you were to need to capture additional data against those, anything in that model, but you want to classify them, in this case, add a serial number or an inspection date, this is a writable model. So you can take that operational asset and start to treat it as a master record. and start to maintain and capture data against elements in your building. So in this case here, I guess it's a fire extinguisher. You maybe want to capture the serial number or the QR code. You maybe want to capture the last time you checked it, and record that against a physical asset in the building, not just a row in a spreadsheet somewhere. And because that starts to raise flags around who can do this. The important thing is it's all backed by access control. So you may have a group of people who can change serial numbers and a bunch of people who can rename spaces or whatever. So it's backed by access control, and it's backed by versioning and audit trails, so you can see who's done what when. And there's a rather interesting bit where you can go and see, well, how did the model look a week last Tuesday? And it'll show you how the data looked or the building looked at that point in time. More prosaically, I guess you can tag things, you can put documents against anything, you can put issues against things, jobs, spares. Essentially, it's an online COBie data management platform with the 3D in the mix as well. So that's one of the use cases we've got there, and I perhaps won't show that today, but just give you an idea of things you can do, and think of it as an editable data set. One of the things that we do quite a lot with as a separate use case is working with infrastructure projects. So just to give you an example, on the top, working with an organization who has a specialism in costing and carbon evaluation on infrastructure projects. So that's highways, roads, tunnels, bridges and the like. Specialists in costing, but also carbon. And their product is fantastic in terms of a kind of a calculation engine, but it didn't have a BIM capability, didn't have a 3D takeoff. And that was an example where their ultimate client said we need to demonstrate BIM capability really quickly. And with using essentially XBIM Flex and the cloud power, we're able to really quickly do BIM quantity takeoffs, integrate that feature into their software product. So while this is a Windows application, this is all coming from the cloud. Lots of positives with that. Basically means you're not distributing around large infrastructure models that are quite sensitive. Lots of access control, and you just access the data you need to access. So in this case, we're querying the amount of piling depth we need to drill for a particular flyover here. Give you a couple of other examples. With digital twins we get involved with, particularly kind of offshore type things, are quite interesting. A lot of work with hospitals, schools, data centers. So it's really scalable, and we've got a particular specialism in managing infrastructure projects. Third use case is what I just mentioned earlier, and so this came out actually during lockdown. It was a early stage proof of concept to see whether we could undertake a life cycle carbon assessment or life cycle assessment to calculate carbon, embodied carbon, in a building design more efficiently than it's currently done today. And if you're familiar with what's involved with this, by and large, carbon assessments, if you're going to do one, get done really late in the process, and they end up being quite costly and quite manual. So the poor old carbon consultant will probably get a bunch of drawings, maybe some bills of quantities, and from that we'll have to establish what is the probable carbon impact of that design. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you may have not a brilliant impact, but the only way to resolve it is at which point is not to change the design because it's too late. It's to offset with trees and so on, or carbon credits. So what we're trying to do here is say, can you do this automatically? Can you take the human out of the loop, and can you make it really cost effective to undertake a life cycle carbon assessment on a design straight from an authoring tool? Clearly, this is a very small example, and I will briefly show it you. But what we've done here is build an automation system that can take the human out of the loop. It says, so these are the steps involved with doing carbon assessment, and it starts, acquiring data, classifying it, cleaning it up, measuring quantities, and ultimately what we've done here is assign two elements in this building, a best case and a worst case, average mean, and also a category of what kind of what it is and therefore what carbon we've associated with it in a spread. And from that, the idea is you can then establish where's your hotspots. It's a heat map essentially, where should I spend my time focusing on improving the situation. I will quickly flick over to show you this in use. So this is that model. So it's a small house. It's obviously a terrace house. We chose it because it's quite well classified in the first place, and it was publicly available. This obviously works on much bigger models in reality. To give you an example, I'm putting my mouse over there. Chimney stack, which is masonry, and you'll see it's obviously a peculiar shape. It's got a void in the middle, clearly being a chimney. It's also not, it's funny Y-shaped chimney breasts, 2 different fireplaces. But we're able to work out, for instance, the volume first thing, because you need to work out what's the fundamental materials that are in this element. So our calculation engine can go and calculate how much masonry there is. And actually, perhaps if I took a different example of a window, clearly there'll be different kinds of materials in a window. There's glazing, there's aluminium, there's UPVC, and we can quantify all the materials for that and do a best guess on what the overall carbon is. Best case, worst case, depending on how you sourced it, different cradle to gate strategies, and so on. And then with all that comes a bunch of analysis, so you can then start to look at this building model and say, well, where are my hotspots, best case, worst case, or I may want overall, where should we be looking? Okay, some of it's in the slabs, some of it's in the walls, some of it's in the windows. And the last thing you can do is to actually compare this with earlier iterations of a model. So you can take a look at the carbon in this version of the model and compare it to the earlier version and see whether you've improved or hopefully got better rather than getting worse. So you can optioneer over time. And perhaps behind the scenes, this is just the front end. This is how we report on it. The important part of this is that model came in without any carbon data in it, but we've augmented it. And the way we augmented it was with our workflow engine. And our workflow engine leans quite heavily on software build automation, continuous integration, where in continuous integration, software developers put in code to somewhere like GitHub, and a routine will automatically kick in, download their software, make sure it meets the standards, make sure it meets the house protocols, and then kind of stamp it and version it, and then build it and test it, and ultimately stick it on a somewhere you can download or somewhere on a website that can be tested. And it's complete. There's no human in that loop. And so we took that same approach with BIM and said, how can we do that same thing? How can we take a building model and validate it? So you may want to say, is this, I want a building model that must be IC 2.3, or it must be 2.4, or it might be, I need a building model that's got all these elements classified according to unit class, or whatever you want. So essentially, we've got a completely programmable means of working with building data in the cloud. This essentially is going through and running a script. Check all spaces of a name. I've got another one here, which is actually a piece of code that is invoked from this workflow definition at runtime automatically. So in this case, we're using this in the carbon calculation because we really only care about certain aspects in that building. We're not too interested in the plumbing works and the kind of electrical works in there, because fundamentally the materials database is based on aggregate fundamental materials. So this is our workflow engine, and the point to it is it can be turned to all kinds of use cases. So you could switch it out and not do carbon. You could, in its place, you could be doing costing, or you could be automatically quality assuring a model and augmenting it, or maybe it could be an automated rules engine that you use without any human input. The other side of this is essentially people can upload models to it, and they will go through and be automatically inspected. It'll go through those steps. We validated it. One of the things we did, we updated the model and placed it in a different geolocation, exported all the elements, run a carbon assessment, which at the end of the day spits out essentially some data, some CSV data in terms of what's the bill of materials and their carbon impact, and lastly published that augmented model back up here where we could visualize it. All that is done literally by uploading a model, and it works magically. So that's our workflow tool. I think the last thing I want to discuss is what you see here is you've got a cloud platform to manage building data in XBIM Flex, and you can quite quickly build up quite a portfolio, quite a large set of different models. And those models are great, but really people deal with many different projects at once, or many different buildings at once. How can you have that single page view of your dashboard? How are all my projects going? How are all of my facilities going? And that's really where Flex has a strength, because it's not really file centric. It's a data kind of cloud of all your BIM all your building models and all your asset information models in one place, access control based on who you are. So that means you can then start to provide dashboards that report across all of your projects, linking real time into all your buildings. So just to give you a couple of examples, we can build dashboards for this, but one of the nice things we can do is we can hook it into tools like Power BI. And if you're not familiar with Power BI, it's a dashboarding, visualization, reporting tool from Microsoft. It's a mashup tool. Essentially, it will speak to many different sources of data. And one of those sources of data is we have an adapter that plugs into XBIM Flex. So it can go, you can get it to speak to, some Excel spreadsheets you have on site and bring in your building data and mash them together. And in this case, I've got an example where we're looking across all of my buildings and looking at space utilization. So we're looking at all the architectural spaces and seeing how they're classified. In this case, we've got schools in here, so we've got instruction spaces, but we also see we've got administration spaces, circulation, and so on. And what's interesting here is all this information is coming from not just one model, but all the models that this current user can see. So as a kind of an exec, you can look across all of your projects that are live now. As a facility manager or asset manager, you can look across all of your assets. What it also does is it gives you a really simple or relatively simple no-code means of working with your building data. So this is still Power BI, and it actually gives you a bit like essentially a set of database tables that are all linked together and are traversable. In this case, probably can't see, but it talks about models which have facilities, which have spaces on levels, and in those spaces or rooms there will be components with types and issues and so on. Everything's linked, and then I can bring in data like, I think in this case we brought in the uniclass tables so that we could cross-reference the classification analyses. So that's a really powerful tool, and equally it also works straight in Excel. So you can take Excel and dynamically integrate it with XBIM Flex so that your Excel spreadsheets are kind of linked and live in real time to your building data. In this case here, we're just extracting which spaces have I got in my chosen models. So I thought it was an interesting use case because it really is about how do you work pan project and take a mile-high view to all this data we're capturing. To those who are here and those who haven't managed to make it, email addresses there, there's Twitter handles there, and get in touch if you've got a particular question, or if you'd like a demo tailored to some particular aspects that we haven't covered today, because I appreciate we cover all kinds of use cases. We haven't drilled too much into visualization or a lot of what we do on spatial graphs. Yeah, there's an awful lot of particular use cases with mashing up with other data, for instance, that we could demo. So yeah, by all means, get in touch and we can tailor something to your particularly if you've got a use case. Really keen to hear from you.